Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Dana Schmidt-Johnson. I'm the community manager of the Ritual Society and the House Astrologer. Today, we're going to be talking about soul collage. It's an expressive arts practice that develops creativity and intuition, encourages self-discovery, and provides personal guidance. If you've never heard of soul collage, it's the practice of creating your own decks out of collaged cards for their personal use from found images. Basically, if you're familiar with vision boards and you like using those, you are going to love Soul Collage. And to tell us more about Soul Collage and get us super excited to make our own is Soul Collage facilitator LeAnne Kittrell Nesbitt. Welcome, LeAnne.
Oh, thanks for having me, Dana.
So tell us, what is Soul Collage? Please explain this to us.
Okay, great. Well, as you mentioned, it is an expressive arts practice, which involves gathering images that we intuitively select, and then we collage them onto cards. It's a method, and then we follow that with a method of inquiry referred to as the I am one who process. And that process helps individuals connect with their own inner wisdom and parts of themselves that they might have lost touch with. So as our personal deck of cards grows, and we do many cards, we can then consult with them by forming questions and drawing a certain number of cards from our deck to receive guidance for our life. And it's somewhat similar to reading tarot cards, but it's also different in some essential ways, which I know we'll talk about in a minute. To really explain what soul collage is, I think it's important also to provide a little bit of background. So soul collage was developed by marriage and family therapist Sina Frost in the late 1980s. At that time, she was participating in Jean Houston's 3-year Human Capacities program. As her final project, she decided to honor each of the 130 members of her cohort in a special way. So she wrote their names onto index cards, which she placed on her altar, and drew a card each morning. And this became what she called her netter of the day. She had first heard the word netter from Jean Houston, which is an Egyptian word that means an energy or presence that serves as a personal guide, ally, or challenger. So after she drew her daily card, she would then intuitively assign an archetype to that person and add the name of the archetype to the card. And she also wrote a haiku for them at some point in the day. So at the end of the program, she presented her project to the group by reading the names of all the individuals in her group and their archetypes. And she gave each of the members their own card. So you can kind of imagine it wasn't really possible for her to know all 130 members of her cohort that intimately, but even so, a large number of the participants expressed to her their amazement of how spot on those intuitive choices of the archetypes were. And they reported back to her even years later, the synchronicities that related back to that choice. So by that time, this had become such a meaningful daily practice. She really knew she had something. So she continued to make cards to represent her family, her friends, and her clients, and continued the practice of drawing those cards every day. She eventually added collaged images to the cards and began sharing her practice with her therapy groups. And in workshops, she had workshops in her living room, and she had a core group of regular participants. And with that group, she really further developed the method of creating the cards and inquiring of them and categorizing them into suits. So by 1998, Kylia Taylor and Jim Schofield were book publishers, and they attended one of her workshops. And immediately they knew they offered to publish her book, to which she famously replied, "What book?" And but she did agree. And Jim suggested maybe that, something other than the netter card process might have a little bit more meaning for people and more attraction for people. So they, with the blessing of her group, they decided on the name Soul Collage. And they published the first book in 2001, and it was revised and expanded in 2010. And what they found is as more and more people began to learn about soul collage, more people were interested in teaching the method. So Sina, Kylia, and Jim went into partnership to create a training program for facilitators. And they held their first training in Santa Cruz, California in 2003. And now here, 20 plus years later, we have over 5,000 facilitators teaching this method in over 50 countries worldwide.
That's absolutely amazing how much it has grown.
Mhm.
And you yourself are a facilitator. So how did you first discover Soul Collage? And then what drew you to being a facilitator yourself?
Yeah, so I first discovered SoulCollage in 2012, and was attending a free journaling course at the public library, and it just happened to be taught by someone who was also a SoulCollage facilitator. Writing and journaling have always kind of been my primary form of self-expression, but I'd had some years of some personal challenges and deep grief, and I just really wasn't able to find the words to help me process all the internal changes that were going on. Some people might call that a midlife crisis. It certainly was right on time for me, and that at that point. And I needed some clarity around some pretty big life decisions that I wanted to make personally and also professionally. But as I said, it was in a drought of words. Words were failing me. So I had tried to turn to photography as a creative outlet, and it was really helpful. And not to be cliche, but a picture is worth 1,000 words, and that's really the base of Soul Collage, because we're focusing on images and how the images speak to us. And so, but I miss words, and I wanted to get back into writing. So that's kind of how I ended up in the journaling course. I think I was kind of hoping to jar something loose somehow. And when my journaling teacher invited me to the Soul Collage workshop that she and another facilitator were hosting, I was like, okay, yeah, that sounds good. And I guess you could say they had me at the word Soul Collage, because I didn't know much about it, but the name really was compelling. So when I arrived at the home where the workshop was being held, the first thing I saw were piles and piles of magazine images. So they instructed us to browse through and pick up whatever images that stood out for us without really taking time to consider why. After some introductions and a few basic instructions, we just went to work cutting out and arranging images onto cards, experimenting a little with the composition, and finally gluing everything down. I was really interested in how the energy of the images changed as I tried them out on different backgrounds. And I was really pleased with the end results. I felt like an instant artist. You don't have to have a lot of artistic ability to do soul collage, and some people find that they actually do have some. But I did love my cards, and I was very intrigued by the cards that I saw other people were making too. So I could have stopped there and felt like it was a great day to spend the day. But later, when we were invited to speak from the perspective of the cards, while a partner wrote down what we said, I was absolutely blown away by what came out of my mouth. The words that I hadn't been able to access previously really came easily and with just surprising insights that I really could apply to what was going on in my life. At that time, I was blown away by how spot on it was to what was going on. And I didn't know it at the time I was making the card that it had anything to do with that. So why did I become a facilitator? Well, I'm a teacher at heart. So whenever I find something that's helpful in my own life, I'm eager to teach it to others. So I think the seeds were planted in that first workshop, but I continued to make cards of my own for a while, and sometimes with friends that I had made in the workshop that I attended. And when I began my training to become a spiritual director at the Hayden Institute, I found that the soul collage was really widely practiced in that community as well. And they always had supplies ready. And during our sharing times, people would show the cards that they made and speak about how meaningful the process was for them. So in hindsight, this made perfect sense, because the Hayden program is deeply rooted in Jungian psychology. And Carl Jung and Jungians such as James Hillman were a big influence on Sina's work in the development of soul collage. So I think this was the first time, though, that I had realized how widespread the practice was. And I was really happy to connect with others who love soul collage as much as I did. So after I graduated from the spiritual direction program in 2016, I decided to go straight into their Dream Work Facilitator program. At the same time, I decided it was also probably the right moment to pursue the facilitator training, which I did in August of 2016 between the two programs. So during the training, something just clicked with me. I just knew somehow that soul collage was this missing link that kind of connected all these interests and experience that I had. And it was sort of forming the foundation of my vocational calling, which was something I was really deeply questioning at that time.
So this process has really brought you a whole new change in lifestyle. I'm curious, what are the benefits of SoulCollage for those of us who are showing up to it for the first time?
Great question. So I think the benefits of SoulCollage are really best summed up in the organization's tagline, which we also developed in community, which is discover your wisdom, change your world. This is a method that puts us in direct communication with all those many parts that make up who we are. Some of those are in opposition of who we like to think we are. And, maybe for a variety of reasons, we might have suppressed those parts or even just left them behind as we go about meeting the demands of daily life and trying to be what we think we're supposed to be in the world. So to quote Dr. Jung, when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. So SoulCollage is a creative and fun way to make that inner situation conscious. And Sina put this really beautifully in her book. She drew on the story of La Loba singing over the bones that some may be familiar with from Clarissa Pinkola Estes' book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. And Sina described it this way. She said, you're gathering your various inner parts, conscious and less conscious, lovable and irritating, beautiful and shadowy, and then you sing over them so that they can transform you into a freer, more vibrant soul. So that is really at its core what SoulCollage is all about. And there are a multitude of applications and contexts where it can be used, like individual and group therapy, art therapy, spiritual direction, dream work, grief work, addiction recovery, and many, many more.
So you have mentioned that these are cards that you're creating in SoulCollage, and you said that they're similar to tarot but different. Can you talk a little bit about that? How are they different from tarot and oracle cards?
Right. So in tarot, there is a specific structure and meaning that is attributed to the cards, and tarot readers will read the cards, tell others what they mean. Of course, you can do that for yourself as well. But in SoulCollage, no one ever interprets someone's SoulCollage cards for someone else. We make our own cards from images that have meanings for us personally, and we speak to ourselves from the voice of those cards back to ourselves. And so this is really important because when we're creating a SoulCollage card, what we're doing is we're coming in touch with our inner self. And we don't always know when we select the images what parts of those they represent, but as we go through the process of speaking from that card and giving it voice, we discover that. And so nobody can do that for someone else.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's no way they could be the same cards, right? The way they are in tarot. So then how do you utilize these in a daily practice? The same way?
Yeah, so like many SoulCollagers, I follow Sina's daily practice of drawing a card, which that became a part of the book, and she talked about that. And I do also have a dedicated altar space in my own home where I keep my cards, and I display my card of the day, or my netter of the day, as she would put it, and cards from different readings that I've done or recent readings that I've done. I also keep a running log of these daily draws, and it's really interesting to see patterns that emerge from cards. They seem to come up maybe more frequently than others. Sina would oftentimes pick up the phone if it was a card representing somebody she knew. She'd pick up the phone and say, hey, I pulled your card today. Is everything okay with you? So, that it does allow a lot of synchronicity, when you do that. And I also do a monthly reading at the new moon. So we won't get into this today, but the SoulCollage deck, there are 4 suits of the SoulCollage deck. And so when I do my monthly reading, I pull from each of the 4, one card from each of the 4 suits and do some exercises with that. Sometimes I have a specific question, but other times sometimes I just leave the question open to say, okay, who's coming with me in this new lunar cycle? Do you have wisdom to offer? And for these readings, I also do combine it with tarot and oracle cards, and so I'll draw some of those. And it's really interesting how my cards have something to say about the tarot cards and vice versa. So putting them kind of, as in tarot, you can kind of put down clarifying cards. Well, there's a lot of clarification that happens between the two, and I find that I experience a lot of synchronicity when I do that. It's really amazing. You'll hear soul collagers say a lot of times, you can't make this stuff up, right? Because it's like you get the right card at the right time, and then so it really is a powerful process that way. I'm also really deeply interested in the application of soul collage and dream work. Of course, I was interested in dream work. I went through the training. And again, it makes sense because our dreams and the practice of soul collage kind of share that same goal of bringing what's unconscious to the surface, to our consciousness, for our healing and our wholeness and our highest good. So, and both of them communicate using the language of symbol and metaphor. So, in our dreams, the unconscious brings symbols to us in unusual contexts and situations. We wake up and we think, why was this, car in the lake, and, a cat was sitting on the, we don't know what it's all about, right? But as we work with the symbols, we begin to start to uncover the deeper meaning. And so in soul collage, we just rely on our intuition. It's just like one step above being asleep, right? We try to turn our thinking brains off and use our intuition to guide us to images that we put in unusual contexts that may not make sense immediately. But as we gain experience with the symbolic language of the unconscious, we can kind of get past those surface intuitions. Soul collage has often been described as a waking dream for that reason. My project for the Hayden Dream program was actually an ebook, which I walked through one of my own personal dreams and applied the soul collage method to answer the vocational question that was on my mind at that time. And it's available on my website. We'll give information about that. And I also lead dream circles 4 times a year and a year-long group that I do. And we practice soul collage, but also group projective dream work that we learned at the Hayden Institute and other creative practices we use for that.
Lovely. There's so much to this and so many applications to soul collage. So I can't wait to create our own and start applying it. I'm curious, what do you love so much about soul collage?
Well, there's so many things I love about soul collage. I love how easy it is to get started. I love my cards. I just, I look at them. Sometimes I just sit and look at them. They hold so much meaning and there's so much in them. And I love, even though it's just super fun, it's also really impactful, and it's immediately impactful. I mean, just after making your first card and giving it voice, I mean, the tears just come and it's really, really helpful in my life. As a facilitator, I never get tired of witnessing that light that comes on in someone's eyes, when they've kind of come in contact with something really deep and true about themselves and their own inner wisdom. And also the way I had one woman come up after a workshop and she's like, I didn't think I could create any kind of art. And I just think this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, and they have that effect on you. So, and as I mentioned before, when I was telling a little bit about how I discovered soul collage, I mean, there's no question it's changed my world in many, many ways. But what I love the most about it is it has brought me into contact with an amazing community of souls that are deeply engaged in their own inner work, which I don't have to tell you is so important in these times to be doing our inner work, because that's how the world gets changed, with individual people doing their own work. And so, and of course, as a community manager yourself, I know how important it is to have a community of practice to support you in that way. But I would go so far to say that without community, soul collage would not have evolved into what it is or become and had the impact on the individual lives it had without the groups of soul collagers that have been practicing together, bearing witness to each other's self-discovery. It began in community, and it continues to evolve in community. And that's my absolute favorite part.
Yes, community is key to what we do at the Ritual Society. Sounds like to what you do with soul collage, and just to spirituality in and of itself, right? Connecting with one another is so important. LeAnne, can you give us a little insight into what we're actually going to be doing in the workshop itself? Just a short overview.
Sure. So, we have done the last couple of years in our community. One of our facilitators and trainers, Andrea Tuller, who works and lives in Switzerland, has done this card of the year process, where we do a meditation, and we access our intuition, and we select images intuitively that will create a card that will sort of guide us through the year, from our intuitive place. And so she gave me permission to recreate this for folks, and it's just bring your magazines, bring your images, and just be ready to spend a couple of hours with us learning a little bit about SoulCollage and creating a card that will be a trusted guide throughout the year for you.
Oh, I cannot wait. This is going to be so much fun, and doing it with a whole bunch of people at the same time will be wonderful too. Thank you so much for being here today, LeAnne. So we'll see you in January in the Ritual Society for our very own SoulCollage workshop. In the meantime, where can people find you or SoulCollage?
Sure. So you can find out more about SoulCollage at the website soulcollage.com, or our community is community.soulcollage.com. And you can find me on dreamersandmystics.com, and we have Instagram for both.
Perfect. We will seek you out and look for more information in the meantime. LeAnne, thanks so much again for being here today. Have a terrific day, and we'll see you in the society.
Thank you.